Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy. I'm Ryan Honeyman, a partner at Lift Economy. My guest today is Ben Cohen. Ben is a co-founder of the ice cream company Ben & Jerry's. Ben's also an activist, having been involved with issues related to ending qualified immunity, getting money out of politics, taxing billionaires, dismantling white supremacy, reversing climate change, and much more. Ben, welcome to the show.
Yo, Ryan, what's happening, baby?
So, Ben, one of the questions we like to start with is, how did you first get interested in the work you're doing today?
Well, I guess I was a naive and gullible little kid, and when they told us in elementary school that the country was about fairness and equality and justice, I believed it. And then when I grew up and learned that that's not happening that much, I decided to try to get my communities to be more just.
Love it. I saw some of your early job history. I'm wondering if you could speak to, it said you were a Pinkerton guard at one point. Is that true? Or
that is correct. I was a Pinkerton guard at the Saratoga racetrack. It's a beautiful racetrack in Saratoga. I would recommend it if you want to go for a picnic sometime during the season in August. But my job was to guard what they called the Traverse Canoe, which hung out in back of the tote board in the middle of the track on this little itsy-bitsy man-made pond. You can't see it from the stands, so nobody really knows it's there. But there is a canoe that hangs out on that little pond, and every year they paint it in the colors of the uniform that the jockey wore who won the Traverse Sweepstakes, which is part of the Triple Crown. And college kids used to like to break into the track at night and steal the canoe. And my job from midnight to 8 a.m. was to hang out there and guard the Traverse Canoe. They gave me a Pinkerton uniform and a badge and a holster with no gun and a whistle. And if someone came to rob the Traverse Canoe, I was supposed to blow
And how
the
many
whistle.
folks tried to rob the Traverse?
Nobody on my watch. They were too scared of Pinkerton Cohen.
That's a great story. I'd never heard that one. So then you move on. You're wanting to set up an ice cream store with Jerry, your childhood friend. I mean, you've probably told the Ben & Jerry's creation story a billion times, so I don't want to put you through it again. But I am curious, when did you know that this just wasn't a business? This was a different type of business? Like before socially responsible was a thing, how did you know that you were different?
Well, at the very beginning, Jerry and I were looking to open a homemade ice cream shop. We didn't have any plans to do anything beyond that. The plan was to open the homemade ice cream shop and run it for a while, and then when we got tired of it, to sell it and take the money and buy a tractor trailer and become cross-country tractor trailer drivers. This is when we were 26. So we opened up this ice cream shop. Our idea was that we wanted to be community-based, although we didn't know what that meant, and we wanted to run a business in a way that regular, everyday people on the street would like to see businesses run. So at the beginning, we were very, very small. We weren't really making a profit for the first several years. We were paying ourselves below minimum wage, and we wanted to be of service to the community as much as we could. Of course, we, donated money or ice cream when various nonprofits knocked on the door, and we sponsored community celebrations festivals in the park right across from the old gas station. And, and then we were looking out in front of the gas station where the pumps used to be at this big blank wall one day. And we said, wow, wouldn't it be great to have free outdoor walk-in movies in the summer? And so we set up that and started doing that. And that was pretty much the extent of how we were serving the community. And then as the business grew, our community became larger. It was no longer just the local community, it was the national community and eventually the international community. After a few years, the company was at a level of, I think, about $3 million a year. We were wholesaling ice cream to restaurants. Jerry and I were feeling like we were no longer ice cream men, that we had become businessmen, that we were no longer spending our time making ice cream and scooping ice cream to people we knew across the counter, but we were hiring and firing and dealing with accountants and lawyers and memos and documents and all this kind of stuff. And, this was not really our idea of a good time. And we felt like we were becoming more businessmen than ice cream men. And we didn't really like what business stood for. We felt like business tended to exploit the community, exploit the environment, and exploit its employees. And that was not our idea of a good time. And we were planning to sell the business. And then I ran into this old eccentric restaurateur, Maurice Purpura, that I had come to know. I was delivering to his place. And I told him we were planning to sell the business. And he said, Ben, how could you possibly sell the business? The business is your baby. It's got so much potential ahead of it. It's really taken off. And I said, Maurice, you know what business does. It exploits these guys, those guys, the other guys. And he said, Ben, if you don't like the way business is done, why don't you just do it different? And that hadn't really occurred to us before. And so we decided to keep the business and kind of conduct an experiment and see if it was possible that business is just a neutral tool like a hammer, and you could use it to destroy things, or you could use it to build things up and repair things. And we decided to see if we could use our business as a force for progressive social change. And that was the beginning of, I guess, what the social mission became at Ben & Jerry's. At the time, if we were going to keep the business, we needed a significant cash infusion. We were at that stage in the business's life where it needs to grow. We needed to build a real ice cream plant. We had been using makeshift facilities and working conditions were not good, and it would take a significant investment. And, we did have a bunch of venture capitalists that were just knocking on the door. We weren't looking for them. And we essentially saw venture capital as people who already had a bunch of money, who wanted more. And we wanted to see if we could use this need for cash as a mechanism to make the community the owners of the business, so that, it wouldn't be a deal where business donated some money now and then, but that the community would actually own the business, so that as the business prospered, the community would automatically prosper. So we became aware of a law in Vermont that had never been used, that provided for a in-state public stock offering, that we could sell stock in Ben & Jerry's to our neighbors, Vermonters, people who had supported us from the beginning, and raise money that way to spread the wealth. And we did it. against the advice of the accountants and the lawyers and all the business consultants, etc., who said, take the money from the venture capitalists. And by the end of that stock offering, 1 out of every 100 Vermont families had bought stock in Ben & Jerry's. And we raised enough money. It was, I think, $750,000 at the time to build our first ever ice cream plant.
Wow, I had no idea that you did a direct public offering to raise money.
Yeah, that was before it was known as a DPO.
Wow. Because at some point, do you know what year that was around when that raise happened?
I think it was the mid-'80s.
Okay. And when did the company go public? When was that? And what was the sort of story behind that?
That was probably the late 80s. The business continued to grow, continued to do really well. We had a need for more cash. People had bought stock in the company, but the stock was kind of illiquid. There was no market for it. This was before the age of personal computers. Now, if you do a DPO, you can kind of make your own market for your stock and people can buy it and sell it. But there was no way for people to do that at the time. So we decided to have a public offering, an IPO. And as part of that IPO, that procedure, we formalized the Ben & Jerry's Foundation. At the time, our belief was that business essentially was a machine for making money, and that if we wanted to be of as much benefit to the community as possible, what we needed to do was give away as much money as possible. So as part of that stock offering, we formalized the Ben & Jerry's Foundation. And we told the underwriters that we want to write in the prospectus that 10% of profits were going to go to this nonprofit. And they were aghast. They said, you can't do that. We'll never be able to sell that. The street will never buy that. They said the average corporate donation is like 1.5% of profits. Well, why don't you do 3%? We said, no, we want to do 10%. And so we went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Eventually, they got up to 5. We were still at 10, and we compromised at 7.5 in the middle. And it was never a problem. The company did very well without that 7.5% of profits being reinvested or distributed.
Wow. So you, not only did you do a DPO sort of before it was common, but you also probably were one of the first socially responsible, again, before socially responsible was a term, companies that tried to bring that mission and maintain it as a publicly traded company. I'm curious if I could just imagine how it probably went with like quarterly earnings. And was it just a nightmare to be public after you were publicly traded?
No, it wasn't. You got to follow the rules. You got to do what the SEC tells you to do. You got to follow generally accepted accounting principles. And that was the other thing that, the lawyers and accountants were telling us, if you become a public company, you're going to have to disclose what you do. You can't hide stuff. And we said, we don't want to hide stuff. We want to disclose what we do. And we would have these shareholders meetings, and we deliberately wanted to have them at a time and a place that was very accessible to people. We wanted to get as many people as possible to come to our shareholders meetings. The norm in corporate America is that you want to hold your shareholders meeting at the most inconvenient time and place possible because they didn't want anybody to show up. We made it part of a 2-day music festival. So we needed to hire a person. We probably hired another person to deal with SEC compliance, but it was okay.
And one of the stories I've often told, and I'd be interested to see if this is true in your mind, it's sort of like one of the reasons for the benefit corporation legislation is there's this story. And again, I want to see if this matches up with your understanding that Ben & Jerry's, there was some companies like Dreyer's Ice Cream, potentially, and Unilever that were competing to buy Ben & Jerry's, and that there was the way that corporate law is written is that you all and the board felt like you had to sell to the highest bidder or you could be sued based on the shareholders suing you for not maximizing profits. And so you were okay with selling to Unilever, but then that's when you created the social mission board. Was there a real fear that you were going to be sued if you didn't sell the company or if you sold to a lower bidder? Or was that apocryphal?
No, there was a real fear that the company was going to get sued if it did not sell and if it did not sell to the highest bidder. Jerry and I did not want to sell the company to anybody. We did not believe that the social mission would thrive if the company was owned by another entity that didn't really have a similar social mission. And we believe, I mean, I don't think there's much question that the basic problem in terms of the inequity and the injustice in the world is the increasing concentration of wealth into the hands of fewer and fewer people and entities. And having the company sold to some big, huge conglomerate would be making that problem worse. So my idea of Ben & Jerry's was that it was an anti-corporate corporation. Having that in mind, you don't want to sell to some big corporation. But, Unilever made an offer for the company, and that, as they say on Wall Street and in legal circles, put the company in play. And the board of directors, the fiduciary responsibility of the board of directors is to maximize shareholder return. That's financial shareholder return. So when there's an offer to acquire a publicly held company, I think you need to disclose that. And in many cases, the management of the company is opposed to the sale and they try to fight it. And the way you fight it is by showing projections that the company is going to do really, really well in the future, and that whatever price was being offered did not maximize shareholder return. In this case, we had made a mistake and hired a CEO who did not share our values, and he saw a way for himself to make a bunch of money. And so he was not willing to produce those projections, and he wanted the company sold, and so the company ended up getting sold. And so the B Corp, the Ben & Jerry's, what became known as the Ben & Jerry's law in Vermont, was an attempt by the legislature to overcome that very narrow fiduciary responsibility and include the benefit of the community as well. Unfortunately, the advice of our lawyers was that this law was untested and it might allow you to sell to not to the highest bidder, but it wouldn't overcome what the CEO was trying to do.
And I would say that the things that have worked out is like the mission board seems to be, I still haven't found another acquired company that's been able to do something like you have. Like it seems to be, it worked out really well.
Yeah.
And Unilever itself has been interested in becoming a B Corp and has acquired a bunch of B Corps because of you all.
Yeah. At the time of the acquisition, there were some people that were, I was incredibly bummed out and depressed, and I had fought really hard to keep it independent, and I lost. People were trying to tell me, well, Ben & Jerry's can influence Unilever. And Unilever was this, I don't know, $40 billion corporation. We were a $300 million company that they had acquired. I described us as a little pimple on their ass, and we weren't about to influence this giant. And incredibly enough, I think that we have been somewhat of an influence. And yeah, being able to establish as part of the acquisition agreement this independent board of directors is, to the best of anybody's knowledge, something that's not been done before or since. that independent board of directors is responsible for the social mission of the company, the so-called essential integrity of the brand, and the quality of the product. Unilever is responsible for the money. And you know that old saying, he who holds the purse strings. So they call a lot of the shots, but in terms of the social stands, political stands that the company engages in, that's pretty much the purview of the board of directors, the independent Ben & Jerry's board of directors.
And that, bringing it to a little more current, has definitely been somewhat tested with the support of, or Ben & Jerry's taking the action to not sell in the West Bank and Israel, and sort of the both support and conflict that's generated. And I'm curious, how does that, this is sort of a trying time for like Unilever's relationship to Ben & Jerry's and maintaining that independence. Can you speak at all to how that tension is held out in the current times?
I think that Ben & Jerry's has known for a long time that we opposed the way Israel treated and continues to treat people in the occupied territories. We've been very much in favor of a two-state solution and the continued policy of the Israeli government to allow so-called settlements in the West Bank undermines a potential two-state solution. And eventually, the company did a tremendous amount of research, tremendous amount of visits to Israel and the occupied territories, and eventually made a decision that in terms of the values of the company, in terms of justice, that we did not want to sell our ice cream in the occupied territories. We wanted to protest pretty strongly that particular policy of the Israeli government. We told our licensee there that we didn't want our ice cream sold in the occupied territories. I think there's some law in Israel that says if you're doing business in Israel, you have to sell in the occupied territories. So we told the guy that, well, we don't know, I don't know how you're going to deal with it, but we don't want the ice cream sold in the occupied territories. And if you're not going to agree to not sell it in the occupied territories, then we're not going to renew your license. And the Israeli government then instructed all of its ambassadors around the world to organize protests against Ben & Jerry's because of that decision. I think that there is a movement around the world to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel because of their treatment of the Palestinians. Ben & Jerry's did not join that movement. What we did was separate and different. Ben & Jerry's is adamant about Israel's right to exist, but it's a particular policy in a country that involves our ice cream, and we felt like we needed to take that stand and protest that position of the Israeli government, much as we take stands and protest many positions of the U.S. government, still maintaining that the U.S. government also has a right to exist.
Yeah. And I think it was done with incredible nuance and care. And like the article you and Jerry wrote for the New York Times really explained, obviously, this is not anti-Israel's ability to exist. This is specifically for the occupied territories. Yeah. So I just want to appreciate you all for showing that nuance, and sort of the blowback, I think, was maybe to be expected, maybe more than to be expected. But, I think for me, it's clear that the blowback and reaction is not solely a reaction to like what you all did. There's like thousands of years of collective trauma, both for the Jewish people and for like Palestinians and Arabs, and so I think this is triggering that sort of like collective trauma.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Yeah. How do you think we address that collective trauma? Not just like Israel-Palestine, but there just seems to be a lot of baggage we're all holding that's not getting processed. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on like, have you been able to deal with that in your own life at all? Or have you found folks that are leading in sort of that ability to help us move through some of that trauma?
How do you deal with baggage? Well, I'm no expert at that. We've all got our baggage. Personally, I like to move forward and not be affected by the baggage. I want to live in the present, not the past. And no, I don't have advice as to how you get beyond being entrapped by your past. You know, I mean, in terms of baggage and being entrapped by your past, I mean, there's an issue that's current now in the U.S. regarding racism and institutional racism. And I think that Black people in America have a history of hundreds of years of being discriminated against and oppressed. And it's an issue that shows up in the present day in the disparity in generational wealth and household wealth between white people and Black people. And I just think about my parents who were able to buy a house on using a low interest government loan that was not available to Black people. It was specifically written in the law that regulated those loans that they would not approve loans into areas where Black people were living. And if a Black person wanted to buy a house in an area where there were no white people living, they wouldn't approve the loan there either, because then there would be a Black person living in the area. So, I mean, that was an official government policy that affected generational wealth. My parents were, I don't know, they started off as either poor or lower middle class, and it was through that equity in buying a house that they got whatever amount of wealth they developed. And it was because they had some money that I was able to get accepted into a good college. So baggage. I kind of feel like we're living today with, you know, in a society where a big chunk of our society was denied opportunities. And so I feel like today we have to work to provide those opportunities, and we have to somehow we need to work to overcome the inequities of the past. And it's just really interesting that at the same time, you've got this movement of people who do not want the truth and realities of how our government operated in the past to be taught to our students. They want it wiped off the history books, because what I'm told is that they're afraid that students will not come to love America enough. And I don't know. Something don't seem right about that to me.
Yeah. We can't pick and choose our history.
What do we like and so.
Not. Yeah. I'm glad you told that story. I was just real briefly, my two grandparents, my grandfather on both my parents' side, both fought were in the military. And then so they got all the benefits of the GI Bill that Black GIs didn't get. So I'm in that same boat where they got free college and low interest loans. And so when someone says to me, your family worked hard, I'm like, well, sure, they worked hard, but it's not like they didn't get all these boosts, and that Black and brown families are not working hard. So I think that's kind of what you're pointing to, is we have to reconcile with what's happened in order to move forward.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, you talk about white families got these boosts and black people didn't. Corporations also get these boosts and regular people don't.
Are you optimistic? You've had more experience than I have in the sort of getting money out of politics and taxing billionaires side. Where are we at with those things? Is it sort of like, well, it's never going to happen. It was a sort of a great thing. But how are you feeling about those initiatives?
I'm feeling like we certainly have not gotten money out of politics. It gets worse and worse every year. I don't really know what the solution is except electing progressive politicians. And I think that the way change happens in the country is that it happens from the bottom up. And the way to elect national legislators that are going to fight to get money out of politics is to elect progressive politicians to school boards, city councils, and that's how they start. That's the root. That's the first rung on the ladder to becoming a U.S. congressman or a U.S. senator or a governor or a president. So I think that's where we need to focus. If you can find a progressive politician at any level, we got to get them into office. We got to elect them.
And in particular, those that commit to not taking any corporate donations, like a lot of the Justice Democrats and Bernie.
Right.
We got about 5 or 10 more minutes. I'm curious, what are you most excited about right now? What is getting most of your energy and juice, right? What topics or actions are sort of getting you most excited?
Jerry and I are the co-chairs of the national campaign to end qualified immunity. When there were all those protests that happened after the murder of George Floyd, what people were protesting was that Black people get arrested and shot and killed by the police, and there's no accountability. The cop usually doesn't get charged, or if they are charged, they get off with a slap on the wrist. And one of the big reasons why police are not held accountable when they abuse people, when they abuse their authority, is because of this crazy doctrine known as qualified immunity, which is essentially a get-out-of-jail-free card for rogue cops. You know, cops are also known as law enforcement officers, and they're also the only entity in our society that we authorize to use lethal force in our name. And instead of holding those people more accountable, we hold them less accountable. They are immune from prosecution when they abuse people. So I'm a regular guy. If I haul off and punch someone in the mouth, they could sue me. If it was a cop, your case would get thrown out of court. This impunity is what infects and destroys the culture of policing. I mean, I think a lot of people go into policing wanting to do the right thing and wanting to really protect and serve. But then when you're actually there, you see these cops that are abusing people and no problem. There's no accountability. If you don't have accountability, you ain't got nothing. I mean, you know that as a business person, you could make whatever regulations, rules, procedures that you want in terms of how your employees go about doing their job. But if you don't hold them accountable, they're not going to do it. If you don't hold them accountable, you're essentially saying, well, those rules and regulations and all that stuff, we don't really mean it. You break the rules and regulations, nothing happens to you. This campaign is a coalition of about 24 organizations, national organizations that run the gamut from the ACLU and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund to Americans for Prosperity and the Cato Institute and the Institute for Justice. And we're all working together for justice. It's comparatively easy to protest and attend a demonstration. The act of actually changing the laws is a lot harder and takes a lot more time. It's kind of amazing that these were the biggest demonstrations in anybody's memory. And Congress was supposed to pass a law to reform policing, and they just punted. They're not going to pass a law to reform policing. So now we're focused on working state by state and municipality by municipality. Colorado has outlawed qualified immunity. New Mexico has overturned qualified immunity. The city of New York has overturned it. The state of California has just voted to overturn qualified immunity, and we and our coalition partners are going to continue to work state by state, and hopefully, eventually, the federal government will come along as well. But these police officers, they are people who are operating in our name and with our money. We are responsible for what they do. And what they're doing in too many instances is abusing minorities and low-income people.
And where can folks go to learn more about how to get involved in this? And maybe if you want to drop any websites or other links to get involved in any other projects you're involved with.
You can go to holdcopsaccountable.com. You can go to the campaign to end qualified immunity. That'll get you to the same place.
And I would also, you seem to be pretty active on Twitter. So I guess if folks want to follow you, because you're actually tweeting a lot about ending qualified immunity. And
yep, that's at Ben Cohen.
At Ben Cohen. Well, Ben, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate you. Thanks for expanding on the story of Ben and Jerry's. It's really helpful for me and everything you're up to. I feel like I respect you because you don't wade into lightweight political issues. You're like, what's the heaviest political issue? And then I'm going to get involved in that one. So I really appreciate you and what you're up to.
Yeah, you got to strike at the root.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. Before you go, we wanted to let you know that our spring cohort of the Next Economy MBA begins on March 26th. If you're an entrepreneur seeking to create a business that works for all life, a member of a team looking to transition your organization into one that is more regenerative and democratic, or someone who's considering a career or livelihood transition and embodiment with your values, we designed this course for you. Over this 9-month learning journey, you'll have the chance to learn practical skills around business and life design based on our work with over 250 social enterprises. In addition to live sessions, you can deepen your experience and practice with special sessions, affinity groups, and connections with over 500 alumni who have participated in the course. Interested in learning more? Visit lifteconomy.com/MBA to view our course curriculum and sign up for a free intro with one of our facilitators. If you're ready to sign up, you can use the code PODCASTMBA to save 10% on tuition. We hope you'll join us.